As a mother, she always carried a deep, unending longing for her daughter in her heart. After discovering her daughter's address, she decided to approach her by assuming the role of a nanny. The film begins with a scene of a girl named Elizabeth negotiating a 3-night love contract with a wealthy man named Charles to pay off her father's debt. And once her child is born, her task is complete. They first meet at the Darkley Library, where Charles stands behind a screen and repeatedly asks Elizabeth why she isn't married and why she must do this. Elizabeth responds that she is willing to sell everything to earn money to repay the debt, and she knows this man only needs her temporarily. These questions make Elizabeth feel uncomfortable, but she still accepts due to financial pressure. Over the course of 3 consecutive days, Elizabeth stays in a secluded hotel. She enters the room to meet a handsome gentleman who appears somewhat anxious and continuously drinks while conversing. He informs her that they will only have 3 days together. 10 months after the child is born, whether it's a boy or girl, Elizabeth will be paid a significant amount of money. However, she must keep it a secret and cut off all contact with the child. Elizabeth didn't object because it was part of the deal. She turned around and began undressing. On the first night, Elizabeth lay on the bed sideways as Charles awkwardly performed the ritual. Charles noticed her change and encouraged her to express her feelings. Their relationship changed slightly. The final night, Elizabeth bravely unleashed her deepest desires, feeling joy from the bottom of her heart. This also marked the final ritual of their 3-day journey. 10 months later, Elizabeth gave birth to a baby girl, but the child was taken away immediately before she could even lay eyes on her. Pregnancy and childbirth are arduous. No mother can separate from her child. In the years that followed, on each of her daughter's birthdays, Elizabeth would write a wish in a journal and send her distant congratulations. After 7 years, Elizabeth learned about her daughter and immediately went to see her in the role of a tutor. She learned from the servants that her daughter's name was Louisa, a lonely and stubborn child, whose 3 tutors had left because they couldn't bear her temperament. Louisa often secluded herself in the small house by the lake when she had free time and rarely ventured outside. When Louisa first met Elizabeth, she maintained a cold and unfriendly attitude, demanding that Elizabeth leave. Instead of being irritated, Elizabeth felt even more determined to stay and care for Louisa. The next day, Duke Charles returned, and upon seeing Elizabeth, he was utterly astonished. The two entered the room to talk. Charles had to contain his shock, demanding Elizabeth to leave immediately. Elizabeth stated she couldn't forget her daughter and what happened when she was born. Charles was furious at Elizabeth for breaking the contract, but according to the tutoring agreement, he had to keep her for a month. To explain, Charles recounted the events of 10 years ago. His wife had an accident and became a vegetable, so he turned to Elizabeth to maintain the marriage. But fate brought them together, and Elizabeth will be the strictest tutor. Elizabeth is willing to paint her face when the child misbehaves, and she pours a cup of paint on her own face. Elizabeth accepts Charles's request to teach the girl well. The way Elizabeth punishes Louisa is also how she treats herself. However, what Elizabeth wants to teach Louisa goes beyond textbook knowledge. As Louisa has lived in seclusion from a young age due to the absence of maternal affection, Charles spoiled Louisa, which made her stubborn and unwilling to learn on the first day. The girl even mocked Elizabeth for being poor and uneducated. Seeing this, Elizabeth locked Louisa in the classroom, despite her incessant crying. Charles, unable to bear his daughter's wailing, angrily demanded an immediate end to the lesson. However, Elizabeth remained steadfast in her position. After 2 days, Elizabeth discovered Louisa had been neglected for too long, and the girl no longer recognized herself. And Elizabeth knew her strictness would benefit Louisa, but Louisa had to learn to listen to her first. And to reassure Charles, she pledged to endure any punishment alongside Louisa. Charles relented, comforting Louisa before leaving. Elizabeth kept her commitment. That evening, Louisa refused to eat dinner in a rebellious outburst. Elizabeth heard Louisa curse her to death, but still accepted it. She began to captivate Louisa and instructed her on how to die gradually. Louisa grew weary of Elizabeth's approach and became fascinated by the cards on the table. Elizabeth seized the opportunity and started teaching Louisa basic vocabulary and grammar, then told a story about light and fire. She explained that fire was like magic, capable of stopping time when the fire went out. People no longer had to obey the rules. They could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. The fire will reignite, and everything will return to normal. Louisa listened attentively that day, but the next day she became stubborn and disobedient. Elizabeth told her the truth bluntly, saying that as she grew older, things would change and she would drift away. But there was one thing no one could take away, and that was Louisa's intellect. Elizabeth succeeded in disarming her daughter's weapons with unconditional love. Louisa stopped resisting and began to study diligently. Charles was very pleased and grateful to Elizabeth for seeing his daughter mature, and Elizabeth gradually developed new feelings for him. At night, Charles shared thoughts he had kept hidden for many years with his wife, but it was the first time he had opened up to her while sober. Meanwhile, Elizabeth also had deep feelings for the man who had bought her virginity, but she couldn't put them into words. She often watched Charles swim in the lake, silently gazing at his body through the misty glass and unconsciously caressing his figure. Her love burned passionately, and they met in the study that night. Charles took the initiative to share his past from 7 years ago with her, stating that it couldn't happen again, and he wanted Elizabeth to control her emotions. The past was behind them, but they couldn't deceive their hearts. As they looked at each other, emotions inside them ignited. That night, they overcame moral restraint to express the deep love in their hearts. Louisa, sensitive to the relationship between her father and Elizabeth, quietly wandered on the frozen lake. Suddenly, the ice cracked, and Louisa fell into the water. Elizabeth saw her and immediately jumped in to rescue her. Even though Louisa didn't accept Elizabeth as her tutor, Elizabeth's actions couldn't hide the fact that she was Louisa's birth mother. Watching Louisa sleep, she promised the girl she would never leave her again. As time passed, Louisa gradually began to open her heart to Elizabeth, and Louisa knew that the frail woman lying vegetative was not her real mother, but she would visit her every day. Louisa loved Hope Pavilion because she considered it her own space with her mother. On a snowy winter day, Lord Clare, Charles's father, returned. He was a man who loved extravagance and luxury. Right after returning, Lord Clare hosted a Christmas ball. Charles didn't like dancing, but when alone with Elizabeth, he couldn't resist holding her close and dancing. Their relationship developed rapidly. There were times Charles wanted to take Elizabeth and their daughter to a distant place. However, with the responsibilities of a family man and heir, he couldn't allow himself such whimsical thoughts. Charles's business was struggling, and he had to sell everything to repay his debts. This property became like a prison for those Charles loved. He had never considered whether his wife would want to live like this. He had loved his wife for 10 years and perhaps had hurt her during that time. He stifled the fire within and opened all doors and windows, tucked his wife in, praying she would be protected and cared for by God. The cold wind in the night was like a dagger swiftly taking away Charles's wife's life. Elizabeth, though not directly involved, knew something was happening with Charles. When Louisa entered Elizabeth's room, she accidentally saw her picture book and realized that Elizabeth was her mother. Finally, they cast off their shackles and forgave each other. The three of them left the estate in a horse-drawn carriage, embarking on a new life in a distant place. Life is full of surprises, and when we encounter them, adapting and managing our emotions may be painful. But we must be true to our hearts and hold on to our beliefs. Only you can truly save yourself. That's the only way to escape suffering. Time can heal everything, but the prerequisite is letting go. If we continue to cling to the past, the damage will persist, and the pain will only grow. Charles and Louisa did what they had to do. They fled. Fortunately, they met Elizabeth, a strong and loving person, so their painful past was quickly severed by the blade of love. Thank you for joining us throughout the movie. If you found this film interesting, please hit like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on the next exciting content. See you in the upcoming videos.